Carl Jung's most unsettling revelation didn't revolve around empathy and isolation. It had everything to do with the dark unconscious forces that are silently at play when highly sensitive individuals attempt to help others. At the core of his research lies a disturbing psychological contradiction. The more genuinely empaths offer help, the more likely they are to be met with hostility or resentment. This phenomenon, which Jung found consistently in clinical settings, sheds light on what he termed the shadow confrontation, a psychological reflex, where people react negatively when confronted with aspects of themselves they prefer to ignore. Jung coined this recurring behavioral loop the helper's paradox. It describes a pattern where well-intentioned, emotionally intuitive people provide real heartfelt support only to find themselves vilified or cast aside by those they tried to uplift. The paradox: their kindness acts as a mirror, one that reflects the recipient's buried feelings of inadequacy, dependence, or suppressed vulnerability. And instead of gratitude, the reflection is often met with projection, rejection, or outright aggression. In one case that deeply impacted Jung, he observed a patient who had benefited immensely from the consistent, emotional, and practical support of a close friend. This friend was present during the darkest phases, offering unconditional aid. And yet, when stability returned, the patient became increasingly irritated by this friend. They began accusing them of being overbearing and suffocating, even blaming them for making them feel incapable. Eventually, they severed ties. This baffled Jung until he realized the hostility wasn't truly about the helper's behavior, but about what their support symbolized: a painful reminder of the patient's vulnerability. To Jung, the implication was clear. The helper became a psychological trigger, someone whose presence forced the other person to confront truths about themselves they'd rather deny. The result? A defense mechanism kicked in. Rather than integrate those uncomfortable emotions, the psyche chose the easier route: projection. Jung wrote that people cannot tolerate being seen in their raw neediness, so instead they lash out at the one who simply witnessed it. This realization helped Jung explain why empaths often feel as though they're punished for caring. Their natural ability to intuit others' emotions bypasses social masks, revealing emotional truths recipients may not be ready to confront. It's not the act of helping that causes friction. It's the unintended psychological confrontation that occurs when someone feels seen too deeply. Jung mapped this experience into what he described as the psychological mirror process, a three-stage dynamic that explains how empathic interactions often lead to rejection. First comes involuntary reflection, where the empath unintentionally mirrors back the emotional reality of the person they're helping. This makes the recipient feel emotionally exposed. Then comes shadow activation, in which hidden shame, neediness, or fear of being less than rises to the surface. Instead of processing these feelings, the recipient jumps to the third stage: projection defense, blaming the empath for their discomfort. Jung found this mirror process particularly destructive in relationships where emotional intimacy was present, such as between friends, romantic partners, or therapists and clients. The closer the bond, the stronger the reflection, and the more intense the reaction could be. In many cases, the helper becomes a lightning rod for all the recipient's suppressed fears and insecurities. The empath unknowingly becomes a symbol of everything the other person is struggling to avoid. At the heart of this reaction is what Jung called the dependency terror. It's a deep-seated fear of being reliant on others, especially in cultures that idolize independence and self-sufficiency. When an empath offers support, it doesn't simply come across as kindness. It can feel like an assault on the recipient's sense of autonomy. To the unconscious mind, the help implies weakness, need, and dependence, qualities many people have been conditioned to reject within themselves. Jung identified three major psychological responses recipients often exhibit during this dynamic. The first is what he described as pride armor activation. Here, the ego quickly builds defenses to shield itself from perceived humiliation. Even if the help is respectful and well-intentioned, the act of receiving it can feel like a threat to one's pride. This may manifest as the recipient nitpicking the helper's intentions, accusing them of being self-righteous or intrusive, even if the empath was simply trying to be present. The second reaction is the competence threat. When someone else steps in to help, it can highlight areas where the recipient is struggling, even if they weren't consciously aware of it. The mere act of offering a solution can make someone feel exposed or less than. This perceived gap in competence can evoke deep resentment toward the empath, not because they did anything wrong, but because their help reminded the recipient of personal inadequacies. The third reaction is the autonomy violation. Some individuals experience help as an infringement on their independence. Instead of interpreting assistance as "I care about you," they hear, "You can't do this on your own." This misinterpretation is particularly common in people who were raised to value self-reliance at all costs. To them, accepting help feels like surrendering control. Even if the empath is simply acting out of love or compassion, the recipient may feel invaded and react with hostility to reassert their independence. What makes all of this more painful for the empath is that none of these reactions are conscious. The recipient may not even realize why they're suddenly feeling irritated or defensive. All they know is that something about the helper makes them uncomfortable, and rather than explore that discomfort, the instinct is to push the helper away. Jung was clear these reactions have far more to do with the recipient's unresolved psychological material than with anything the empath actually said or did. Yet the empath still bears the emotional fallout. They might begin to question their intentions, wonder if they were overstepping, or even start to believe the negative projections aimed at them. This psychological fallout often gives rise to what Jung termed empathic confusion. It's a state where the empath, despite acting from a place of sincerity and care, begins to doubt themselves. They question their motives, replay conversations, and wonder if they were somehow manipulative or overbearing. This self-doubt can spiral into what Jung called assistance phobia, a learned fear of helping others because it so often results in rejection, resentment, or conflict. In repeated cases, Jung noticed that empaths may internalize the very projections thrown at them. If someone accuses them of being condescending, selfish, or attention-seeking, even without any real basis, sensitive individuals may start to believe it. Jung called this the projection poisoning effect. It's especially damaging because it doesn't just affect one relationship, it can alter an empath's identity. They begin to suppress their natural instincts to care for others out of fear of being misinterpreted, criticized, or emotionally punished. These dynamics can also destroy relationships entirely. Jung observed countless examples where both the helper and the recipient spiral into a mutual avoidance loop. The empath, hurt by the unexpected hostility, withdraws. The recipient, feeling ashamed of their reaction, but not understanding why it happened, also pulls away. The result is silence, awkwardness, or permanent estrangement, even though the original interaction began with a gesture of compassion. Jung called this dynamic relationship fragmentation through unconscious projection. It's not that the two people are fundamentally incompatible, it's that neither one fully understands the unconscious forces at work. The helper doesn't realize they've triggered deep-seated insecurities. The recipient doesn't recognize they're projecting their inner shame or fear of vulnerability onto the one person who tried to support them. In broader terms, Jung believed this phenomenon contributes to a larger cultural problem he described as empathy erosion. In societies that glorify rugged individualism and emotional self-sufficiency, there is little room for openly receiving care. Over time, people become conditioned to view help not as a gesture of love, but as a challenge to their identity. As a result, fewer people are willing to help, and even fewer are willing to be helped. The ripple effects are immense: increased loneliness, disconnection, and a breakdown in authentic human relationships. But Jung didn't stop at diagnosis, he offered solutions too. He believed that both empaths and recipients could learn to navigate these psychological dynamics in healthier ways. One method he emphasized for recipients was projection recognition training. This involved learning to notice when emotional reactions are disproportionate to the situation and tracing those feelings back to their roots. For example, if someone feels angered by help, they can ask, "Is this really about the person helping me? Or am I reacting to something within myself?" For empaths, Jung advocated for what he termed conscious helping protocols. These are strategies for offering care in a way that preserves the dignity and autonomy of the recipient. Rather than swooping in to rescue someone, empaths are encouraged to ask permission, offer help collaboratively, and always affirm the other person's competence. This approach makes the recipient feel respected rather than pitied, which significantly reduces defensive responses. Jung's emphasis on dignity-preserving care reshaped how empathy should be expressed. Instead of positioning themselves as saviors, empaths were encouraged to become compassionate allies, offering support not from a place of superiority, but from a stance of mutual humanity. One simple yet powerful strategy was to reframe help as a partnership rather than a solution, saying, "Would you like me to help with this?" instead of, "Let me fix this for you," communicates respect and avoids triggering the hierarchy instincts buried in the unconscious mind. Jung also underscored the need for empaths to develop what he called projection immunity. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally detached or cold. Rather, it's the ability to recognize when someone's rejection or criticism is less about you and more about their unresolved emotional baggage. Empaths with strong boundaries can maintain their caring nature without absorbing the psychological projections of others. But healing the helper-recipient dynamic requires transformation on both sides. For those receiving help, Jung introduced the practice of shadow integration, facing the uncomfortable truth that being vulnerable, needing support, or not having all the answers doesn't equate to weakness. It's a normal human experience. Integrating this shadow self allows people to accept care without feeling ashamed and without pushing others away. Jung warned that people who haven't integrated these emotional truths tend to fall into archetypal behavior patterns when help is offered. He identified 4 distinct personas often triggered by empathic care, each reflecting different unresolved psychological themes. First is the pride warrior. This person sees any offer of help as an attack on their independence. They react with bravado, exaggerated self-sufficiency, or even outright rejection. Their internal script might be, "I don't need anyone," even if they're deeply struggling. Jung noted that many pride warriors developed in childhood environments where needing help was associated with failure or shame. Second is the shame transformer. These individuals internalize deep self-criticism about needing support and redirect it outward. They accuse the helper of being condescending, manipulative, or controlling not because that's true, but because they feel embarrassed by their own vulnerability. Jung called this emotional alchemy, transforming internal shame into external blame. Third is the guilt reactor. This persona emerges when someone feels excessive guilt for being a burden, even if the helper never indicated such a thing. They may reject support not out of pride, but because they believe accepting help causes pain or inconvenience for others. Jung found that many guilt reactors grew up in environments where their emotional needs were met with resentment or martyrdom. Lastly, the control detector. This type suspects that every gesture of support has strings attached. They've often experienced manipulative forms of help in the past and now view all care as a form of coercion. To them, even sincere empathy feels like a threat to their freedom. They may distance themselves not because they reject love, but because they fear being controlled. Understanding these archetypes helps both empaths and recipients navigate emotionally charged interactions with more awareness. It also reveals a core truth. When someone rejects your help, they may not be rejecting you, but confronting a painful part of themselves that your care unintentionally exposed. Jung referred to this phenomenon as mirror destruction. When an empath reflects back emotional truths someone isn't ready to face, the recipient may lash out, not to hurt the empath, but to shatter the mirror. It becomes easier to blame the one who revealed the vulnerability than to confront the vulnerability itself. This defense isn't malicious, it's protective. But for the empath, it can feel deeply personal. What makes this even more complex is that the hostility often arrives long after the help is given. The empath may believe the interaction was positive, only to later face avoidance, criticism, or rejection. Jung observed that this delayed reaction is part of the unconscious processing. Once the emotional defenses come back online, the psyche seeks to correct the experience of feeling exposed by devaluing or pushing away the source of discomfort. To break this cycle, both parties need tools. Jung designed practical strategies that could be applied in everyday relationships to reduce the likelihood of helper rejection. One of the most important is asking for consent before helping. This seems simple, but it shifts the power dynamic. By allowing the recipient to choose whether or not to receive help, the empath signals respect for autonomy, one of the most psychologically protective gestures possible. Another key element is acknowledging the recipient's strengths. Jung encouraged empaths to validate what the person is already doing well instead of focusing solely on what's lacking or needs fixing. When care is offered in a way that affirms competence, it's far less likely to trigger defense mechanisms. For recipients, Jung proposed what he termed vulnerability normalization. This practice involves reminding oneself regularly that being human means having needs and that accepting help is not a failure, but a strength. Journaling about times when support improved one's life, reflecting on past rejections of help and their consequences, and consciously welcoming assistance in small, safe ways are all methods to rewire the emotional response to care. Jung also highlighted the importance of community empathy education. In cultures that place extreme value on independence, people often feel ashamed of their natural need for connection and support. Public conversations, psychological literacy, and normalized mutual aid systems can help dismantle the shame around receiving care. In supportive communities, empathy doesn't threaten dignity, it reinforces it. Jung envisioned reciprocal empathy systems where every individual has both something to give and something to receive. These networks function not on hierarchy, but on shared humanity. People rotate between roles of supporter and supported without judgment or loss of face. Ultimately, Jung believed that the ability to give and receive care freely was a mark of emotional maturity. The more a person had integrated their own shadow, the parts of themselves they had previously rejected or disowned, the less likely they were to react defensively when those parts were mirrored back by others. This journey from unconscious reaction to conscious integration is what Jung considered the real work of the empath and of anyone who seeks to build authentic, lasting relationships. Jung's insights also shine a light on what separates healthy helping from toxic overextension. He warned against the codependent helper, someone who offers care not out of grounded compassion, but from an unconscious need to feel needed to control or to secure emotional validation. These individuals often disguise their own insecurities behind constant helpfulness. But recipients can sense the hidden expectations and often react with discomfort or hostility. In such cases, the empath's actions, while outwardly generous, carry an emotional weight that recipients instinctively want to escape. Jung termed this dynamic help as control. Even if the strings aren't explicitly stated, the unspoken contract might sound like, "I helped you. Now you owe me trust, loyalty, or emotional access." This kind of caregiving, no matter how well packaged, undermines autonomy and quickly leads to rejection. By contrast, Jung praised models of empathy that were grounded in humility, boundaries, and respect. He pointed to figures like Fred Rogers and Mother Teresa, not because they were saints, but because their care carried no superiority. Rogers always addressed children as equals, never lecturing or belittling. Teresa, despite the controversy around some of her methods, often emphasized the servant model of empathy, where the helper does not elevate themselves, but simply walks beside the suffering. These examples reveal that the intent behind care matters just as much as the action itself. True empathy isn't about fixing or saving. It's about presence, acknowledgement, and respect. It allows space for the other person to maintain their dignity even in the midst of receiving support. Jung believed that emotionally evolved relationships must be mutual, non-hierarchical, and emotionally aware. He emphasized the importance of bidirectional support, where no one is permanently cast in the role of the helper or the helped. This fluidity prevents the imbalance that often breeds projection and resentment. However, Jung was also realistic. He knew that not all relationships would survive the shadow dynamics of helper rejection. That's why he taught empaths how to protect themselves without closing off. He encouraged the development of healthy emotional detachment, not withdrawal, but a wise separation between one's identity and another person's emotional response. In practice, this means learning to discern when criticism is a valid reflection of behavior and when it's a projection of someone else's pain. It means holding space for another person's reaction without taking it on as your own truth. And most importantly, it means continuing to care even when your care is misunderstood. Empaths who master this discernment enter what Jung called unattached compassion. It's a state of mature empathy where one gives freely without the need for control, recognition, or emotional debt. This kind of care is healing not just for others, but for the empath themselves. It allows them to express their nature without compromising their identity or boundaries. But achieving unattached compassion doesn't mean becoming passive. Jung urged empaths to remain vigilant about their motives, continuously examining whether their urge to help stems from grounded love or unresolved emotional patterns. Only through this inner clarity can empaths offer the kind of support that truly uplifts others without triggering defensive responses. Jung's framework also outlined a developmental path for those on the receiving end of care. He described a process he called recipient evolution, which begins with unconscious resistance, but through awareness and integration can transform into conscious acceptance of help without shame or fear. Initially, recipients may respond to assistance with defensiveness, often unaware of why they feel agitated or irritable. They might perceive help as invasive, as judgmental, or as a threat to their identity. But once they begin to explore their psychological history patterns, often emerge childhood messages equating dependency with weakness, past experiences of being shamed for needing support, or relationships where help came with strings attached. Through introspection and emotional growth, recipients can begin to reframe these narratives. Jung encouraged exercises such as journaling, emotional responses to offers of help, identifying triggers, and distinguishing between past wounds and present realities. This helps recipients move into what he termed integration mode, where they consciously choose to accept support without projecting internal conflict onto the helper. This doesn't mean blind acceptance of all forms of care. Jung emphasized the importance of boundaries for both parties. Recipients are encouraged to evaluate whether help is truly aligned with their needs or whether it reflects the helper's unresolved agenda. In this integrated state, they can decline assistance gracefully without feeling guilty and accept it when appropriate without feeling diminished. Jung's ultimate goal was relational transformation, a dynamic where both the empath and the recipient evolve through their interaction rather than regress into unconscious projection loops. When both parties are aware of the shadow dynamics at play, they can engage in open, respectful dialogue about their needs, boundaries, and emotional triggers. For example, instead of reacting with resentment, a recipient might say, "I appreciate your offer, but right now, I need space to try this on my own." An empath, instead of withdrawing in hurt, might respond, "Thank you for letting me know I'm here if you change your mind." These kinds of exchanges build trust rather than rupture it. Jung recognized that few people reach this level of relational fluency without conscious effort. That's why he advocated for widespread empathy education in schools, workplaces, and communities. He envisioned a world where psychological literacy about projection, shadow work, and interdependence became as common as math or reading skills. He believed that such education would heal cultural dysfunctions rooted in extreme individualism. In societies that pathologize vulnerability, people often suffer in silence, convinced that asking for help makes them weak. Jung saw this as a tragic misunderstanding of human nature. He proposed that interdependence, the ability to both give and receive care with integrity, is not a failure of self, but the fulfillment of it. When communities normalize mutual support and individuals learn to manage their own projections, human relationships can become resilient, authentic, and deeply healing. It's not about creating perfect harmony, but about having the tools to repair when ruptures occur and the wisdom to understand that rejection of help often signals inner conflict, not interpersonal betrayal. Jung described this final stage of awareness as freedom through understanding. When empaths grasp that rejection isn't always personal, they stop internalizing every emotional blow. They understand that their presence may have stirred deep psychological material in another person, material that the recipient wasn't yet ready to process. This clarity brings relief, perspective, and emotional resilience. Likewise, for recipients, understanding the unconscious dynamics behind their defensiveness allows them to reclaim agency. Instead of being ruled by invisible patterns, they can choose how to respond with openness, with boundaries, with honesty. They no longer have to destroy the mirror. They can choose to look into it, however uncomfortable that might be. Through this lens, help or rejection is no longer a mystery or a failure. It becomes data. It reveals emotional wounds that need tending both individually and collectively. Jung believed that in embracing this discomfort, people could grow faster and deeper than through any other interpersonal experience. He also cautioned against common pitfalls. One such trap is analysis paralysis, where empaths become so preoccupied with decoding psychological dynamics that they lose their natural warmth. While insight is important, overthinking every interaction can make empathy feel cold or calculated. The goal is to stay emotionally available while remaining psychologically informed, not to become a therapist in every relationship. Another mistake Jung warned about is the wounded withdrawal. When helpers are met with rejection, it's tempting to retreat completely, to shut down their caring instincts or build emotional walls. But this is often a reaction to injured pride, not true boundary setting. Jung encouraged empaths to stay present and kind even when pulling back. True boundaries don't punish, they protect. Finally, there's the danger of internalizing projections. When recipients lash out, empaths may begin to doubt their worth or question their motives. Jung taught that self-reflection is vital, but it must be grounded in truth, not in the distorted reflections of someone else's unhealed pain. Ultimately, Jung believed that understanding these unconscious dynamics could catalyze individual maturity and cultural transformation. When people no longer fear their own need for support, when they can both offer and receive help without shame, they become freer, more connected, and more whole. This vision, he believed, held the key to healing not just broken relationships, but a fragmented world. If you've ever felt crushed by someone's hostility after you tried to help, remember this: it wasn't really about you. It was about what your kindness revealed. And that revelation, though painful, was also a gift. Your capacity for empathy is powerful. It shines light into shadow. It awakens truths others may not yet be ready to see. That makes you a mirror, a guide, and a potential healer, even if the road is often rough. Keep offering your light, but protect your peace. And never forget, understanding the shadows of others begins with embracing your own. If this perspective helped you reframe a painful experience, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into human psychology and emotional growth.